My early life was slightly unusual in that I was brought up overseas in South America. When I came back to the United Kingdom, I did find it quite difficult to get used to a new culture, which is perhaps understandable. I've spent quite a lot of time with psychiatrists and therapists and on my own trying to work out where this all started. The conclusion we've come to is that there's certainly indications in my earlier life that I had depressive tendencies, and that might have been an issue anyway. But the mania, the other side of the bipolar, only made itself felt later in life. I didn't enjoy school very much. I didn't get on terrifically well with a lot of my classmates. Part of that, as I mentioned, is particularly to begin with, I'd come from quite a different culture and I wasn't really familiar with how things worked in Britain, and I was the short fat kid with a funny accent, so I might as well have had a target painted on my head. Later on, in senior school and so on, it was better. It became easier as I sort of developed a personality for myself, and I was less concerned about others. Later on, I started boarding, and that had its positives and its negatives. It did give me more opportunity to develop my own personality and who I am, but equally it meant I was in close proximity to people who I didn't get on with and who did make life difficult for me. Regarding teachers, there weren't that many problems. Academically, I was a good student, and so the academic side of thing was fine, and so on. I didn't particularly enjoy sports for a long time, and particularly until I could give up rugby, which I hated with a passion, mostly because it was licensed 4 times a week to beat 7 different kinds of shit out of me. But with the exception, of course, of the PE teacher, I got on pretty well with the adults I came into contact with when I was younger. I started at university in 2001, and the first year was fine, fairly average. And I used to work on a summer camp over the summers, and I'd gone out to Spain where the summer camp was, working there for a couple of months, which was fine, and I had a great time. When I came back, I was aware of that I wasn't myself getting back into life at home. Obviously, I was, nervous. This was at the end of the first year, going back to university and so on. And I was just finding normal life harder and harder. I mean, at the time, I had no concept really of what depression was. I'd heard of it in the abstract, but didn't really understand it. I remember I was taking Spanish as part of my degree, and the course was split up into 2 classes, and I was confused, and I turned up for the wrong class. Turned up an hour early, and someone said, "Oh, you've turned up for the wrong time." And it was just something about the way they said it really got to me. It brought back a lot of memories and how I'd felt at school, sort of being bullied a bit and so on. And I remember feeling, I don't know, just for some reason that just really got to me, and I ended up going and literally going and sitting in the toilet, locking myself in a stall, and just sort of falling apart. And I was sitting there crying for, I missed the following class, so I was all over the shop. And that's when it started to be obvious to me that something was wrong. So I went and saw the GP, my GP, who I have to say was very good, who said, well, you've probably got some form of depression, this is common and whatever. And he started me on a drug called fluoxetine, better known as Prozac, and set me up with a therapist. So I started seeing a counsellor every week just to talk through various things. So that's how it started. I'd been dealing with that for a while, but and I wasn't aware of this at the time, I'd been as the year wore on, becoming increasingly erratic in my behaviour. It's interesting, it's also one of the years where academically I was most successful at university. I was involved in the Students' Union, I was doing well in that, I got an award and all of this sort of stuff. But I was beginning to show the signs of what I'd later find out was mania. I was becoming short-tempered, but equally I thought I was indestructible. I thought I could do no wrong, that everything was going well, felt more active, healthier, needed less sleep, but at the same time I was having periods where I was really very depressed. It was around that time I started self-harming. It was actually almost by accident. I cut myself by accident, and at times with depression, I've been in a depressive period, there is an awful feeling of not feeling. It's a very, very strange feeling. It's very hard to describe. The best I've been able to come up with is sometimes if you lie on the beach, look at the sky, but with your eyes closed, when you sit up and look around, all the colours are faded for a bit, while your eyes readjust to not having bright light. And it's that everything feels wrong and somehow hollow. And just the feeling of anything, even if it's pain and even if it's self-inflicted, makes you feel human, that there is actually something alive inside you. I brought this up with the psychiatrist. It was actually later on that I started becoming, that mania started becoming a particular problem. It was fortunate really that I'd had a good relationship that I'd built up with the psychiatrist I was seeing, because I went and saw him because I had an appointment, and I was clearly not well. I mean, I vaguely remember it. People have told me since how I was behaving, but I went into a meeting, so a student union meeting, and started cursing everybody in the room for trying to get in my way, because I thought there was a sort of conspiracy against me or something. It sounds ridiculous now, but that's how I felt at the time. So the psychiatrist put me on a course of an anti-psychotic, and yeah, so in a way the diagnosis was luck. So a lot of people go for a very long time, decades without a formal diagnosis. I was lucky that I was in the system, had a good psychiatrist, and happened to have an appointment with him at the right time. The mania actually sounds quite funny in retrospect. At one point I was absolutely convinced that I was going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I absolutely believed it. So I decided, seeing as my obvious genius was going to be recognised, I should probably write something. The thinking patterns aren't exactly logical. I've still got what I tried to write, and it's barely English. It's meaningless. I remember I couldn't concentrate on anything for any length of time. I couldn't concentrate long enough to smoke a cigarette, and so I would smoke half a cigarette, lose interest, put it out and light another cigarette. And people would come round and I'd have ashtrays full of half-smoked cigarettes. So in a way the mania is more dramatic because you have moments like that, and the way I dealt with people was, well, it wasn't very nice, and lost friendships at the time. People who didn't understand what was going on. God knows I didn't. I, for a long time, refused to believe there was anything wrong with me. That's part of the disease, is that you lose all grip of reality at times. The depression, less dramatic, but it's awful. Hypomania, which is a lower form of mania, can actually be, in a way, quite enjoyable. You feel more able, more active, you need less sleep. As it developed for me into mania, particularly the first time, was actually quite scary. I mean, I was becoming paranoid and so on. Wasn't helped by the fact that I wasn't eating properly, I was drinking too much, I was sleeping a couple of hours every other night and so on. With the depression, the most obvious symptom for me, and it's something which bothered me for a long time afterwards, was the self-harming. I mean, it's sometimes described as a physical representation of how you feel within. That's not quite how it was for me, but it's a useful metaphor. I really didn't like myself. And when I've been really depressed, it's become, I remember when I was living in London, I was living in a block of flats, and being able to go downstairs to pick up the post and go back into the flat at times felt like a real achievement. It's just going out of my door felt like a real achievement. I had to take time off university. I actually had to leave university twice, and because I just wasn't coping at all. There's no way I could have, I wasn't going to classes and so on. And so the whole experience, the real feeling that you're not worth anything is it's unpleasant, but it's also something that never really leaves you. I mean, now I'm fine, I'm very lucky, but it's not something you forget. You remember how you felt, even if it doesn't make sense and you don't actually feel it. The first time I self-harmed, I said, was by accident. Was with a cheese knife. It's all very banal, and I caught my finger, and I think part of it as well was the visual sight of blood. I mean, obviously it's quite bright and red, and it's like, my God, there is something human inside here. So I used to cut myself. I started using razor blades. They're easily available and easy to chuck out and quite sharp. I also used to burn myself with cigarettes, mostly on my upper left arm. So there's an amount of scarring there. Regarding medications, I started off when it was just vanilla depression with Prozac, fluoxetine. After a while, the depression was getting worse, and by then I was seeing a psychiatrist, and he put me on to escitalopram. Sorry, not escitalopram, venlafaxine. Which I found to be, it's probably the best antidepressant I took. Unfortunately, of course, we didn't know this at the time. One of the problems is, for people who've got a predisposition to mania, it can just push them a little bit further. So I had to come off that, and now I'm on escitalopram as an antidepressant. I'm not currently taking an anti-psychotic, but for a long time I took olanzapine. That was prescribed to me to begin with, just to calm me down when I was off with the fairies. It was a very effective medication. I mean, it's fairly strong. I started at a relatively high dose because the concern was, how do we calm this person down? Does he need to be hospitalised? Fortunately, I talked to my father about what was going on. He'd wanted to know what was going on, so he'd met the psychiatrist, because I'd wanted him to know what was going on. I was living with Dad at the time. And, the psychiatrist said to me, look, this is what I want to do. And so I said, call my father. So he was able to help with that. And I stayed on that at a lower dose for a long time. The only problem with olanzapine, it was very good. I mean, in my experience, it was terrific. How it calmed me the hell down, kept me stable for a long time. But it's quite a powerful drug. Made me very, very tired. Well, not tired, but sleepy all the time. One of the common side effects of olanzapine is weight gain. I put on quite a lot of weight at the time. Those in themselves didn't bother me, but it dulled my mind, made the thinking process very slow and very difficult. So I made the decision to come off it. It's not something I think my psychiatrist was terrifically happy about, but I'm running a risk. The chances are that at some point it will reoccur. It might not be for years. Fortunately, my wife is a medical doctor, and she's very supportive, so that's why I felt able to make that decision. I've taken one or two other things for anxiety. I think I was on Geodon for a while, but I didn't like it, so I went back to the olanzapine and then came off it. So I've been very lucky in a way in my experience of it, because we've had to try different doses, and I've been on 3 antidepressants and I think a couple of antipsychotics. That's, for some people that's really good. Some people have to try a whole range of things. The main things, I've avoided having to start taking lithium, which is a very potent drug, very effective, but very potent, and the gap between treating you and dead is very small, and so I've been keen to avoid that. I've been fortunate in that I've had people around me who have supported me a lot, and that's made it all a lot easier. There was one point when I was taking venlafaxine as an antidepressant because I hadn't come off it. 'Cause you can't just switch the drugs. I was taking olanzapine as an antipsychotic, Buspar for anxiety, buspirone, but known as Buspar. And I had a lung infection, just something I caught, and it went a bit nasty. So I had an inhaler as well, and I was taking antibiotics, and I was taking steroids. I had to cure this lung infection. I mean, wasn't very well, physically or mentally. I don't know if you've ever taken steroids, but they come in very small doses. So I was having to take 8 pills of steroids 3 times a day, plus antibiotics, plus the antidepressant, the antipsychotic, the anxiolytic. So I think I was 23, and I was taking for 3 weeks, I was taking 40 pills a day. I was going, what's going on here? You know, it's like my grandmother. I mean, it was for a few weeks. It's funny in retrospect, but I was a bit concerned at the time because it felt like everything was going wrong. I was taking bucket loads of pills. It felt like I was starting to rattle. Gosh, with friends, it's interesting. It was one friend of mine. Her name's Rowan Harvey. Probably, if she hadn't intervened when she did, I'd probably have topped myself. But she said, "Look, there's something wrong." She literally sat me down and said, "Right, give me the number of your doctor. I'm calling the doctor now." Yeah, you find out that some people will move heaven and earth to help you. Equally, some friendships I lost. I can understand why. I mean, the way I wasn't myself, but the way I behaved was pretty appalling towards people. At times I was just paranoid about what was going on. Sometimes I was just full of myself, and I couldn't possibly have done anything wrong, even though I was being incredibly unpleasant. A depressive isn't always the most pleasant person to be around when they hate themselves, but or in my case, I was totally self-absorbed about how much I hated myself. With my family were incredibly supportive. I went home one weekend to see my folks in Somerset, and said, I remember we were actually in my brother's room. My brother wasn't there. My mum was there, and I said, "Look, I need to talk to you about something. Can we call Dad in?" And my mum said later she thought I was going to say I was gay. And it was like, no, I mean, I said I've really been struggling at university, been seeing a doctor, I've been suffering from depression. I think I'm going to have to leave for a while. This was in January, at the beginning of my 3rd year. And they were fantastic. It took my mum, after the bipolar thing, I think it took my mum a while to understand it, but never anything less than supportive. My father, actually, when he was about my age, had a depressive period as well, and so he did understand quite a lot of it. What's interesting is comparing it, because obviously I'm similar to my father in various ways. The progress in medicine is just unbelievable. He was taking a class of drugs which are still very occasionally prescribed, called tricyclics. They're only used for incredibly stubborn depression, almost as a last resort before you're getting on to sort of electroshock, because the side effects are horrendous, just awful. I think it says something about the disease, though, that even with those horrible side effects, he found it preferable than being depressed. But at that time, my father, when he was about my age, I think slightly younger, as a form of sort of self-expression, took up photography. He bought himself a Zenit camera, a Zenit B. I didn't know any of this, but I knew he had the camera, and I said, this was when I'd been at home sort of recuperating for a few weeks. I was looking for something to do. So I said, can I use your old camera? I said, yeah, of course. It was only later that he told me that he started photography for the same reason that I did. It was a way of, you know, it was a way of expressing myself. You know, it's supposed to be one of the easiest forms of self-expression. I was never a particularly good photographer, but I enjoyed it tremendously, and I still do. Yeah, there was, or actually there was more than one. One was when my psychiatrist, this was about 2 weeks after I'd seen him, when I was particularly bad with mania the first time. And he said at the time, and I didn't take it in, you know, you've probably got bipolar. He wasn't happy to give a formal diagnosis because I've been taking venlafaxine and, yeah, that predisposes you and so on. Well, I had a second occurrence of it. I know I had a hypomanic phase, and I recovered from that. And I asked him, what's been going on? What's happening here? I'd already had an idea. I mean, I'd looked on the internet, and he said, well, I'm fairly sure that you have some form of bipolar disorder. I mean, it's upsetting to hear that, but I was sort of prepared for it, and I had an idea. It's actually, I found it really useful because it's my God, I can call it something. This is what's wrong with me. Hallelujah. So I had an idea what was going on, but also meant, oh my God, it's an illness. There's something wrong with me. I'm not crazy. Because there were times when I thought, you know, it can be very lonely, and I thought, my God, I'm going insane. You know, I'm fucking certifiable. But it's like, no, this is something that's reasonably well understood, something that can be dealt with. You know, there's medication, there's therapy, there's things you can do. You know, people like myself who live a perfectly normal, productive life. I don't think most people would know unless I told them that I have a history of mental ill health. You know, it's something that you can deal with. It's a pain in the arse at times. You know, I have more problems with depression at the moment, and you know, there are times when, you know, I get into work and I sit there for an hour and I think, bloody hell, I did well there to get in on the train. But you can do it. You can live a normal life. A psychiatrist's role is the medical side of it. They're there to give advice and to handle the pharmacology, the medicine, and so on and so forth. They don't themselves do the talking therapies. I've saw a few therapists. I did group therapy for a bit. I saw a cognitive behavioural therapist. I found it to be useless. For me, it didn't work. I know for some people it really does. I don't want to diminish it in any way, because I know people find it really useful. My way of handling it was to say, no, this is a medical problem. This isn't me, this is a medical problem. And so I didn't want to internalise it in that way. The best therapist I saw was one, well, actually the worst one I saw was one, as you can see, I quite like hats. There was one who said I should stop wearing hats because I was doing it to draw attention to myself. You know, I'm 6 foot tall with a red beard. I draw attention to myself anyway, and I'm fairly loud. So I stopped seeing him because I thought he was just on the wrong page. Best person I saw was someone who basically said, right, you've got this, it's not going away, how do we deal with it? And so it wasn't, you know, how does this make you feel? But it was, right, what in the past, what have the signs been of you being depressed, you being manic or hypomanic? It's like this, and this, right, we're going to go through. If this is happening, you know, if your eating patterns are changing in this way, you probably need to think about going and seeing a psychiatrist, making sure everything's all right. I found that to be useful because it was a way of dealing with it which I could understand, where I could say, you know, this is a disease, this isn't me. Now, for different people handle it in different ways, and for some people therapy is very useful. I have other friends who have mental health problems who find it very useful. It just wasn't for me. But that one, the practical one of how do we deal with this, I thought was great. Recently, past couple of years, I've been doing very much better. I met somebody, now my wife, just as I was finishing university. I mean, I will probably never know how she put up with me for the first year we were together, because at times I wasn't well. I had some time off work and so on. It was not a pleasant year for me, but Alice, for some reason, stuck with me. We're now married. That has made, I mean, the difference in me is enormous. People have commented. I know myself, part of it is time. I've got used to it. I'm in a stable situation. I'm doing pretty well. I run a small think tank. You know, I do what I want to do, more or less. There's still things I don't like doing because they bother me. But equally, there are things I can do, same as anybody else. So having Alice there has made a tremendous difference. I mean, okay, part of it, yeah, she's a doctor, so she knows what she's talking about and knows some of the signs. But she's been wonderful to me, as of my family, and you know, I've got a group of really close friends, and it's the people that you can call up at 3 a.m. and say, yeah, Joe, I'm not feeling well, and they'll say, you know, do you want to talk? Do you want to come round? That makes a difference. And so yeah, I'm doing well. It may be this will reoccur. I'll have real problems again in the future. In fact, the chances are that I will. I don't want to say I'm sanguine about it, but it's something I think I'll be able to deal with. With you know, with the people around me, with my wife, my friends, my family, psychiatrist. I'll be able to handle it. And like I say, if I didn't tell somebody, I don't think they'd know there was anything wrong with me. Even though there's some things I don't like to do. I still find crowds very difficult. But you know, that's not unique. There are lots of people who don't like crowds. So I'm doing well. If I had to give advice to somebody who's in a similar position to me, well, if they're in a similar position to me, they almost don't need the advice. They've found a way of living with it. If I was speaking to somebody who just found out, or was always going through it, I think I'd say a couple of things. One is it gets better. It does actually get better. When you're feeling like whale shit at the bottom of the ocean, it's hard to believe. But it does get better. There are things that can be done to improve it, no matter how bleak the situation looks. I mean, I'm lucky. I know people who have had far worse problems than I have, and a lot of them have you know, they're not cured of it, but they handle it. They help, you know, they hold down jobs. You know, some good jobs, some bad jobs, but they hold them down. It does get better. The other thing I'd say is it's not you. It's a part of you. It's a part of it. Informs who you are, and you never forget the experiences. That will never leave you. But it's not who you are. It's a disease, and it's a disease. Okay, it's not a disease that will ever be beaten, but it's a disease that you can hold back, and hold back very effectively. And reach out to people, a GP, a charity like Mind or Rethink. There are people out there who have been, you know, any situation someone's going through with a mental health problem, it feels incredibly lonely, but there are people out there who have gone through exactly what you're going through. And it's difficult, but it is worth reaching out. And there are people out there who won't judge you, won't criticise, but will sit and listen and advise and help. And it does get better. It's not easy, but it does get better.